Tonight on Greater Boston from the Boston Public Library. It's not only been an historic year for women in statewide elected office, but in corporate executive offices too. The latest Boston Club census that examines the highest levels of the state's top companies is showing big improvements in some areas, but plenty of room for change in others. Joined by the report's co-authors on their major takeaways. Then with the reports that Amazon will see the latest major layoffs in the big tech sector, what does it mean for the larger economy and your personal economy? Washington Post columnist Michelle Singletary and Axios business editor Dan Primack will break it all down. Over the 20 years since the Boston Club first started tracking women's roles at the biggest companies in Massachusetts, there's been a lot of movement in the right direction. As the latest report just out today found, the top 100 public companies in the state hit multiple new records, increasing the number of women and people of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds in top leadership roles. For example, in 2003, when the report first came out, just 9.2% of the executive officers at these 100 companies were women. In 2013, that number was 10.8%. As for this year, well, let's bring in my guest for the big reveal and to talk about where there's still plenty of room for improvement. Co-authors Toni, Wolfman, and Patricia Flynn started this census 20 years ago, and this one is the last for both of them. We'll talk about that in a minute. Toni's also former chair of the Boston Club's Corporate Board Committee, and Pat is a professor of economics and management at Bentley University. Pat, Toni, congratulations. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Nice to see you as well.
You as well. Let me fill in a couple of blanks if I can. I started with those, the percentage of women executive officers, 9.2% in 03, 10 years later, 10.8%, double that number in the most recent report, 21.5. Let's go to women directors, if we can, for a second. 9% 20 years ago, 13.8% in 2013, and a more than doubling this year to 29.6%. Toni, starting with you, why the progress? What do you attribute it to?
Well, I think, first of all, the progress has really been in this last decade. The first decade, things moved very slowly. And I think it took a while through education, advocacy, and the like to get boards, nominating committees, and also CEOs to understand the importance of diversity at the top in terms of what it does to the dynamics of decision making. But I think in the last several years, you had certainly the racial reckoning after George Floyd's death. And I think that was the big trigger for the most recent changes with more directors of color joining the boards of these companies. Longer term, it was the clout of the institutional investors, I think. Money talks. And even before BlackRock and State Street got involved, we have, particularly in Boston, outfits like Trillium, Walden, a number of socially responsible investors who were acting to change the landscape. Steve Grossman, Deb Goldberg.
Treasurers,
Yeah.
But Pat, if I can, getting back to what Toni said, have they learned how important diversity is? And we're going to get to the issue of people of color in a minute, but how important diversity is both internally and to their bottom line? Or is this more a case of sunshine being the best, not disinfectant, but incentive to do good things, or otherwise you get pretty badly embarrassed?
Right. Well, you know, we didn't do a survey of that nature, but I would hope that it's certainly the first, that the message has certainly changed. And it's not just coming from one or two places. It's really coming from a variety of different groups. And I think, too, that they start to see that, you know, when we started, 50 of these companies had no women, 50 out of 100. So, you know, this year we're close, almost all of them. But I think once you get one, even having been the first woman on a couple of boards, I can tell you it really changes the nature of the conversation. So I think partially when it started, they might have been, you know, what's this going to bring to us? How are we going to react?
But they get it now.
different views, different sources of information, that I think that really helps the case.
You know, Toni, I want to go to directors of color, and this is also from your current report. White men, 59%. White women, 23%. Men of color, 11.1%. Women of color, 6.6%. I know those stats for particularly women of color are up dramatically. They're still pitiful, I should say. Is your sense that on this front, we're going to continue to see the kind of, I guess, rapid progress, not enough, but rapid progress that we've seen during the last decade?
I don't know how rapid. You know, the bottom line changes with the rate at which there are that openings are filled. And over the last several years, women, and particularly women of color, have been elected to those vacancies. Sometimes boards have been expanded, but often it's just taking the place of retiring directors. I think it will continue because I think as boards, nominating committees become more familiar with the vast talent pool out there, and they've learned a lot over the last decade as to how to source candidates. They don't rely as much on their narrow personal networks. And you have more and more women and people of color becoming corporate executives at the top. So if you look at our report, when we list the women who are executive officers in these companies, many other companies will look at that and say, well, here's even local talent who we might talk to.
You know, Pat, I don't know if one of you created one of my favorite terms that I never heard before you two, 0-0. Who came up with that?
I don't know.
The best.
We used it for several years just amongst ourselves. We used to, you know, when we'd be in meetings, we'd go 0-0.
Does any set of words say exactly what something is? Meaning 0 women in the executive suite, 0 on the board. When you started this, there were 35 companies out of that 100 who were 0-0s, went down to 26 in a decade. There's only 1 this year. What is the 1, by the way, and what's their excuse, Pat?
Global partners.
And what's their problem?
Well, you know, they've had women before in both
Oh, well, that's
positions.
plenty. We don't need them now, as long as we had them in the past, right?
They actually had some people leave. And so it's not that they've always had 0-0. And I know they do have some executive officers that are not included in the SEC database that we use on collecting this information.
Okay. So,
but they still have currently they have no women on their board, but they, as I understand it, they are actively looking.
I'm sure they are. Can we talk about the future just for a minute, about external forces? Boston now has, for exactly a year, a woman mayor, first time ever. We have a woman governor-elect, first time ever. 5 out of 6 women constitutional officers, first time ever. Does that put even more pressure on these companies that do business here, Toni, to diversify their boards for, I think, pretty obvious reasons? Does it?
I don't know, but they certainly are visible. And I think just the fact that these women are so visible and so powerful sends messages to everyone. And I think an important constituency, quite honestly, are the women coming up who are starting to see themselves or see others like themselves in positions of authority. Hey, all right, maybe I can do it too. Yeah. And I think there's internal pressure in companies as well. We want to see people like ourselves at the top.
You know, Pat, I am a mandate kind of guy. I know a lot of people aren't. And my attitude is you give entities, individuals, organizations a chance to do the right thing. And if they move too slowly, then government's got to be involved. I'm sure you know better than I. The European Union just passed a measure that required their members have a certain percentage, I think it's 40% of women on boards by 2026. Some individual Western European countries, the same. California had such a provision until it was struck down recently. Are mandates, I know corporations don't like mandates. Is that ever discussed as sort of the stick that's hanging out there if the carrot doesn't work?
Well, I think, as you said, some of the mandates were struck down. So I don't think we can depend on that happening and being consistent. But I do think the fact that, say, the Boston Globe and the BBJ and other newspapers and magazines have highlighted the 0 zeros that you said, or highlighted companies that only had one for long periods of time. So I think that is more pressure than necessarily hoping the government's going to come up with something that doesn't get struck down, a year later.
Well,
you know, by the way, before you continue, Toni, I should just say, Pat, based on what you said, Shirley Leung at the Globe has been all over this, in great part thanks to you. But the issue in general, nobody has been more relentless than
she really has.
Shirley.
Yes, she has. Absolutely. Now, I was going to say the kind of mandate that I support is mandatory disclosure, such as this new NASDAQ rule, because you're forcing companies to be public about the composition of their boards in ways that all of us can understand. And when they have to grapple with that and they see the gaps, they're going to think twice about it, and I think become more intentional.
You know, Toni, staying with you, there was a time before he was governor that Charlie Baker was in the dreaded private sector. He was obviously head of Harvard Pilgrim, and he has told me on more than one occasion, I know he chaired the corporate advisory board for the Boston Club, but he's gone out of his way to say something I wasn't aware of, that you all helped him find women to sit on the board of Harvard Pilgrim. So it's not just this report, it's actually finding individuals to fill these spaces that you guys have been really helpful with.
The Boston Club has been doing that since the 1990s.
But at a time when no one was doing it. Because the word's getting out.
Yeah.
Yes.
The word's getting out, and more women know that this database exists. And so they are contacting the Boston Club and saying, hey, I would really like to be considered for some boards. So I think we're now getting a lot more people adding their names to the database, which has also been very helpful.
By the way, this is not binders full of women, if that's what people are thinking about. Before you go, this is it for you two. What's the deal? Why are you leaving? Toni, starting with you.
Oh, I'm leaving because Pat's leaving. No, honestly.
And Pat, why are you leaving?
I can't imagine working with another partner.
Pat?
I'm actually leaving because I'm retiring from Bentley. I have been there 47 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Including 10 years as a dean. And I'm also on the Columbia Funds board, and we merged during COVID, and we now oversee about $300 billion in assets. It's another full-time job.
Yeah, I guess it is. Well, let me just say, I think on behalf of everybody, you've made a huge contribution to important things over the last 20 years, and I know your work will continue, but I want to thank you for tonight and thank you for all you've done for the past 20 years. Thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Staying in tune.
Yeah.
If you want to see the full report, you can find it online at thebostonclub.com. Or if you're a little short on time in the interim, you can check out Shirley Leung's great piece in the Boston Globe. Next up, big tech companies, many with a big presence here in Massachusetts, have been slashing jobs left and right as the year comes to a close. We've seen 20,000 cuts in the last week alone from Twitter, Facebook parent Meta, and Lyft. And now reports indicate Amazon will be cutting another 10,000 jobs as early as this week. And if that has you worried about your stock portfolio and thinking about moving into alternative markets, tread carefully, because we also just saw the collapse of cryptocurrency exchange FTX, which was hawked by the likes of Tom Brady, Steph Curry, and Shaq, among others, and which is now filed for bankruptcy and is under federal investigation. So what does this all mean for you and me and the economy beyond these workplaces? I'm joined by Michelle Singletary, personal finance columnist for the Washington Post. Dan Primack is the business editor at Axios. Dan, Michelle, great to see you both.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Dan, starting with you, when you see thousands of layoffs at these places, what's your takeaway? Just high-profile headlines or a broader, deeper kind of problem?
broader, deeper problem, but for the tech industry specifically, which really, I guess, arguably overhired. If you look at the last couple of years, really even going before the pandemic, tech companies, Amazon, Facebook, et cetera, were hiring at a much greater rate than almost any other sort of company was, and with very, very high paying jobs. So, if you look at the overall economy is adding jobs month over month, but it's tech, which had kind of overhired and is now cutting back, in part because there's a slowdown in ads, which is hurting companies like Facebook. But also there is expectations of a kind of broader, if not economic, not recession, definitely slowdown in consumer spending, which is something that Amazon's looking at.
Michelle, do you subscribe to the same analysis?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they got bloated, especially during the pandemic. But, people were on Facebook. People were buying things on Amazon because we were all sort of, many of us stuck at home. And so now people are venturing out. They want to get out. They want to go to, brick and mortar stores, actually, and traveling. And so, but I think we have to be really careful not to look at what's happening in the tech industry as an indictment of all the companies and whether, many companies are going to have layoffs. We certainly are having trouble in the economy, but it's not as bad as people think when you look at some of the other numbers. People are still adding jobs. People are still spending, and they're going to be spending for the holiday.
Well, speaking of spending, Michelle, I had to do a double take. When I read Jeff Bezos saying that people should put off large purchases, I had a feeling I would see him sitting on your lap with your arm up his back, working his mouth. Were you shocked by that comment from Mr. Consumer in America?
Yeah, well, he's my boss, so I'm not going to go there. But
oh, I forgot about that, actually.
I want to keep this girl's job.
I forgot about that.
So let me just say this. I think it is wise that if you are struggling already or you're just getting by paycheck to paycheck, that you be very careful right now. We don't know really where the economy is going. We may be in a recession. We may skirt past one. But it is true that there are lots of Americans who are suffering right now. All those tech workers who are out of work. And here's the thing. They are highly paid individuals. And when we had the Great Recession, we knew that it took anywhere from 18 months to 24 months for highly compensated individuals to find similar employment at that same income rate. And so, but they've got mortgages based on those high salaries. They've got kids in private school, or they've been shopping and doing all kinds of things. And that, is a concern for me. So I always tell people, if you're on the margin, particularly at times like this, that you should put to the side large unnecessary purchases or home improvements and things like that until we see how things shake out.
I'll call you after the show and you can tell me what you really think about what goes on there, okay? Dan, can we continue the tutorial just for a second? I've learned in this whole process that obviously when the Fed raises interest rates, consumer spending comes back, business investment goes down. So layoffs, I guess, one would assume are a natural consequence. But the flip side is when it's so hard for companies to find employees, I would say that if you're that big and that wealthy, you hesitate to lay off people in those kinds of numbers, because when you need them back, you're going to have a hell of a time finding them. What's wrong with my analysis?
I think the only thing that's wrong, as Michelle said, these are generally very high-paying jobs. And for sure, Facebook, Google, et cetera, they have struggled over the last couple of years to hire too, not in the same way that your corner coffee shop has struggled. They've struggled because these candidates have their choice of lots of jobs offering huge salaries, so they've had to compete. But because these are very well-compensated roles, if they do decide to hire back or regrow, they're offering really, really, really good packages. This isn't somebody deciding between two crappy jobs. These are great jobs, and they will be able to find their people.
A minute ago, Dan, Michelle said she wasn't sure whether a recession's in our future. I'd love you to give your 2 cents, but whether it is or not, it's just a word to most people who are living normal lives. What should it mean to them in a concrete way?
What it means in a concrete way, it does tie into jobs, because employers look at that and employers care if America's in a recession. And they obviously look within the numbers and inside what they actually do and what they actually sell. But if employers believe that their business is going to slow, that probably means their hiring is going to slow, or they might lay people off because they want to be able to maintain their margins and they want to stay in business. So that's why you should care. If there's a recession, long term, that probably does bode back poorly for hiring.
You know, Michelle, you wrote that, and I'm paraphrasing, that Musk at Twitter conducted a master class in how not to treat people, the 3,500 people he laid off. Based on your experience, and you deal with real people all the time, does that trickle down to instill fear, not in people who work for Twitter, but people who work in other big companies worrying that that's going to be me next?
Yeah, you know, the thing about it is we know historically that when companies get in trouble, the first thing they look to is layoffs. You know, you don't see mass layoffs, you know, the CEO taking a pay cut oftentimes. And so I do think it shakes people's confidence in their own job. And maybe it's a good wake-up call for some folks to say, if it could happen there, it could happen to me. I think the way he conducted it was horrible, inhumane, no empathy. I mean, you know, people are learning about their livelihood on Twitter from a tweet. Yeah. I mean, I just, you know, I have a master's degree in business. And if I was in class right now taking my courses, we would be outraged. You know, it'd be a case study. We'd all be fussing. You know, you need to be humane with people. If you have to have layoffs, you know, do it in a way that doesn't make people feel that you don't care about them. You should make it seem like this is the last resort. And I'm so, so sorry. I mean, he's got time to tweet. He should have got on that private plane and visited workshops, or at least had a Zoom call to say, hey, listen, I am sorry. Because part of the reason why they're suffering is that he took on all this debt, the richest man in the world taking on debt, which impacted his workers, regular folks' livelihood. And as you can see, I'm pretty ticked off about that. And I don't even work at Twitter. You know, I mean, I believe that you can do it. I had a person that I had to lay off one time because the company was downsizing and it was just before the holidays. And I said, listen, I'm not gonna let this girl go, the single mother, just before the holidays. Can we keep her on at least till the beginning of the year and give her some time? And they agreed to that. And that's how you do things, right? You care about people, especially when you are so freaking wealthy. I mean, it's just a horrible situation for those folks.
You know, speaking of that particular person, Dan Primack, he urged people to vote Republican, and I guess things didn't go quite as well as he expected. But either already today or by the time we go to bed, there'll be a Republican majority, a slight majority in the House of Representatives. What do you think that will mean for all that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes?
I don't think it'll mean all that much, because you're going to have a Democratic Senate and then obviously a Democratic White House, and then you're going to have Republicans running the House. You know, as people kind of in the business community leading into the election said, and they were assuming that Republicans would win both chambers, it will mean a lot more in terms of oversight, a lot more in terms of hearings and maybe even bringing in heads of various regulatory bodies like the CFTC and the SEC. But in terms of actual legislation, which is the thing that often impacts jobs or taxes, et cetera, nobody's expecting a hell of a lot of actual legislation in the next 2 years.
Now, Dan Primack, I know that one of your areas of expertise is in 30-year-old former billionaires. Am I not right about that?
Sounds right.
Okay, so Sam Bankman-Fried, the 30-year-old head of FTX, which essentially collapsed, filed for bankruptcy, Chapter 11, and it's a cryptocurrency company that many of us heard of when we first saw Gisele Bündchen and Tom Brady on television. Can you do like a 60-second, what does this mean for people who are not involved in that market? What's the trickle-down impact, if anything?
If you're not involved in the market, you know, good for you. It probably doesn't mean all that much. And just quickly for those, it's a very complicated story that even those who are investors in FTX don't quite understand yet. Candidly, there's going to be lots of lawsuits and litigation to figure it out. The short story is FTX was an exchange, like a stock exchange. And as an exchange, it should simply be taking a little bit of cut of every trade, and it shouldn't be losing money. That's why it was profitable when people first invested in it. The problem is that Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO, also had a hedge fund separate, which actually predated FTX. And it appears that when the hedge fund started to struggle, Sam took either user money or other money from FTX. He pushed it into the hedge fund, hoping the hedge fund would succeed, and then he could fill the hole. A little bit of Madoff there. Unfortunately, the hedge fund continued to struggle. The hole got bigger, the hole got bigger, the hole got bigger. And a rival cryptocurrency entrepreneur kind of pushed on it a little bit by saying he was basically going to sell some securities. And while that little push made the whole house of cards fall down. For people in general, I mean, it means one thing for sure. If you're going to invest in cryptocurrencies, do it in a U.S. regulated exchange. Yes, FTX has a U.S. affiliate which went bankrupt. But for those who invested in FTX Global, which is the one based in the Bahamas, they're going to have a hard time ever getting their money back. There are U.S. crypto exchanges. I'm not a crypto investor, but if you're going to do it, at least invest via a regulated one.
I assume he's home commiserating with his 9 roommates. Michelle, you're going to have the final 30 seconds just to expand on what you touched on at the top of the interview. For the concerned individual who's worried this is going to happen to him, he's going to be the layoffee, or she is, how does she or he prepare in ways that will protect them should that happen?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that's a little bit counterintuitive because you know me, I'm very anti-debt. But if you think that you're facing a layoff, what you want to do is pull back on any aggressive debt plans that you've had because you're going to need to stockpile cash. And so you want to make sure, you want to make sure that you have money aside to carry you through the months where you might not have any income.
Fair enough. Michelle Singletary, Dan Primack, as always, learned a lot. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.
Hey folks, today we're in Copley Square in downtown Boston. You know, usually I'm the guy who answers your questions, but today you are going to answer my questions about the unwritten rules and quirks of life in Boston.
No respectable Bostonian calls it Beantown.
Some people call us the 617 because 617 is the Boston area code.
Yeah, the bean. Well, that's what I've heard it as, the bean. Boston the bean. Baked beans, I don't know.
Where I see the mailman, he wears shorts, you know? And some other people wear shorts, you know, I guess it's a fad.
I never could get into shorts in the winter, but we do have some Bostonians that can do that.
Shorts is, if you can handle the code, I definitely recommend wearing shorts.
The streets aren't like other cities, like how it's more grid-like. Ours is literally all over the place. You could be on one street for a minute and that street will literally turn into another street and you won't realize it. There's a lot of one-ways, there's a lot of dead ends, there's a lot of cul-de-sacs.
Don't drive your car from place to place. It's not going to work.
Why is that?
And, well, first of all, you can't get parking even if you wanted it where you want it. And secondly, you're going to be forced to spend what you would consider a mortgage for your house to get a parking space.
I have been using the T, but it's super simple for me. It's really easy. It gets me where I'm going pretty fast.
T's frustrating. It's going to take you about an hour to get anywhere on it. It's going to take you a while, so be patient. Relax, bring a book. I felt like this is a pretty accessible city by foot.
There's so many times where I've almost ran people over for jaywalking, and then we do it, so.
I mean, who wants to go from corner to corner? I mean, you know, to cross the street. If I see that it's clear, I jaywalk.
One thing they don't take into consideration, iron don't cry.
Jaywalking is part of our revolutionary spirit. That's how we keep it alive. I'm very good. I'm very good at it. I haven't lost anybody now in 3 weeks.
Well, there you have it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what unwritten rules of Boston you live by, or let me know what you're curious about because, hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there.
The Curiosity Desk is sponsored by Emerson College, inspiring curiosity and creative expression in all of us.